Well, good evening and welcome to this Island Stats Sports Show this Wednesday, January 20th. I'm your host, Earl Basin, and joining me is co-host Jason Juglin J. And we are joined by Sean Field-Lament, the president of Bermuda Rugby, Donna Rayner, the president of the Bermuda National Athletic Association, Kamal Evans, the president of Bermuda Netball Association, Peter Dunn, the president of the Bermuda Bicycle Association, and Keith oh boy.
De Silva.
Thank you. Sorry, Keith. Keith De Silva, the president of the Bermuda Hockey Federation. Well, first of all, Jay, we've been itching to have a conversation with these folks here only because the pandemic has affected their sports among other sports, but their sports as well. And we just want to have a conversation with them regarding their return to sports and the return to sports, obviously, document that has been put out some time ago. Last week we had the Minister of Sport, we had Macy O'Dill from the Department of Youth and Sport discussing the phase or the stages as they were changed. From last week, what are you hoping to hear this week, Jay?
Well, just really, first of all, thanks guys for joining us for this conversation. But first and foremost, just to see how much buy-in they had going forward to putting this document out. A lot of times we had mentioned the last couple of weeks to get some clarity of that document when we read it. And we just want to know how much buy-in that was from the other sports organizations throughout the island, because obviously we can't lump all the sports into one particular area. We have non-contact sports and then we have contact sports. So it's ideal that we have here a group of sports that we should be able to get some answers or get some suggestions that we can put forward to the ministry.
We have 3 sports that are contact and 2 sports that can be non-contact. And basically looking at the policy, it looks as if everybody was lumped into one kind of, everybody's into one sum of being a sport. I know for rugby, that's a lot of contact. They could even go to touch, but it's still contact. For track and field, they can have they do have a non-contact other than relay. So basically, people use their own, if they're doing a shot put or discus, they can be allocated a shot put or discus, or even a javelin of their own, high jump and all that. But let's start off, first of all, by saying good evening to everyone.
Good evening, Earl.
Good evening.
Yeah. Sean, we'll start with you. When you first read the document of returning to sport, obviously you and your committee's got to sit down and decide how this is going to work. And I want to particularly talk about at the senior rank, because obviously there's a lot of different communication going on about the youth side of things for rugby. But let's talk about the senior ranks and how it would affect or getting back into some form of action.
Well, first things first, I want to sort of start off by saying I think the government has done a fine job with the COVID-19 response. I think as a nation, we're much better off than other places. So we've always, rugby, and I know the other sports have always wanted to support the government endeavors in keeping us safe. And I think they've done a good job. Rugby had a sort of return to rugby plan developed in conjunction with our World Rugby and actually Rugby Canada. And that was put together by my vice president, Gemma Godfrey. And we have like a phase A to phase E sort of response. Obviously, rugby has a lot more challenges in that it's a full contact sport. Equipment, gets shared by everybody. Scrums, you've got 8 grown individuals all within sort of 5 feet of each other. So there's a lot of challenges especially with COVID-19. I think the government has come up with I think 4 phases or 5-phase approach. The challenge really is to try to sort of interweave their phased approach with our phased approach. Bearing in mind, I think we've probably done a lot more in-depth study of our challenges as a sport, then I think the Ministry of Sports and Department of Health are more a holistic sort of idea of where we want to go. So it's really getting a balance between people's desire to resume the sport of their choice and balancing it with being responsible and safe for the greater good of the community. Because obviously we don't want to be a super spreader activity. There's been some successes with sports in the early days. I think we had Gold Cup sailing, we had PGA golf, and then we had the World 10 Series that was held here. Each of them had their own sort of challenges. Certainly with the World 10 Series, they had a very strict protocol around testing and then isolation and trying to enforce a bubble approach. And they even then had to cancel, quarantine a couple of teams. So we're working with our clubs. We have 4 senior clubs, and we're trying to sort of come up with a cogent plan that everyone understands. And then, we have, goals that we'd like to achieve. I know Rugby America North are keen to sort of resume domestic play with a view of hopefully sometime in July, maybe resuming international competitions, with the Caribbean Sevens, which is going to be a qualification for Olympics, and then the Rugby 15s tournament in July, the winner of which will go on to America's Rugby Championship, which involves South American teams. At this stage, I think those are stretch targets. I think July is a big stretch target, but I commend people sort of trying to get back to what we all want to do, some normalcy.
Yeah.
So, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be echoing a lot of the other sports concerns. We are still trying to sort of, pick through the direction that came out and the implications. You alluded to the youth side of things. Youth rugby goes from ages 4 or 5 all the way up to 19. Some of the groups are like herding cats, so I don't know how we're going to sort of try to keep social distancing and practices stuff that is safe with those groups, bearing in mind that some of these kids are at school and they're not getting tested. So I think right now we're circling the wagons. We're going to have a lot of dialogue with the committees of the clubs. We're going to try to interpret what the ministry is trying to achieve and how that fits in with our sort of 6-phase approach. I hope that helps, Earl.
Okay. Ms. Raymond? You have to unmute your mic. You have to unmute your mic.
Yeah, I have it unmuted.
Okay.
I think when I first saw the document, when I read through it, and I mean, when you look at stage two, the head and his team training, track and field is not a team sport per se. We don't have 10 people, 20 people, on the field like a rugby, like a football, like a hockey, like a netball. So as soon as I saw that, I kind of felt that this document wasn't geared to every sport. It appeared to be geared more towards team sports. And prior to the outbreak that we had in December, we had basically gone back to competition. We had put together a document probably as soon as we went into lockdown, because our international federation had put out guidelines for training and competition. And basically we took that document and made it, suit Bermuda. So that document was out. It went to Youth and Sport, it went to the health department, and it went to national security, and they all approved that document. So when I look at this document, it's kind of different from what we had put together. Because again, as I said, basically we have athletes that come to the stadium. You have clubs, but they don't have to train together. even when we had track meets, we had it more like time trials. You have 2 or 3 people. When we had road races, we had waves, a wave. And at that point in time, you could have 20 people. So we had waves of 20 people running at the same time, which is something that we could do. If they say it could only be 10, then we can have waves of 10. So this document, I don't think we were too happy about it, because as I said, it was more geared towards a team sport than an individual sport. And I felt that our guidelines were specific to our sport. And I did send a communication to Maceo when he sent it out and asked us what our opinion was. And, I said, I felt it should have been a little bit more flexible, so that it could encompass individual sports. And I did ask him the question, because when we had it before, we had to create a document, a proposal, send it to the national security minister to say, okay, we want to have this event, and we had to basically advise how we were going to be handling the event. And their main concern for us is more starting the event and exiting the event, to make sure when people finish running, they leave the area of competition immediately. And it's the same at the track. Like, we would only have a certain amount of people at the track at a time. For example, we could have all our 100 meters at one time, run those 100 meters, those athletes leave, then the 200-meter runners come. So that's why I said I think there should be a little bit more flexibility in this document, especially when it pertains to individual sports, not just team sports.
Kamau?
For me, I'm going to say that the document looked very familiar. The Indianapolis Association submitted our document back in August, and it consisted of 4 phases. So we actually prepared ourselves and gave ourselves the ability to move back and forth through the different stages, depending upon where we were in under the government guidelines. The document itself, I think that it's something that we can work with. As echoed by Donna, it is very much catered towards team sports. And like I said, it was very familiar for us. So even down to the fact of the amount of persons in the different phases. Where the bit of queries come in for us is, how do we guide ourselves based on what stage we're at? Who tells us that? Are we only supposed to assume based on what the government guidelines come out and state, or are we going to be advised what different stage we're at in the document by Youth, Sport, and Recreation? I don't want to just be assuming that this is where we're at based on what government is stating. But I just feel that I can honestly say that I commend them in a sense, whereas they've now collectively come together, because I know back in August when we were getting our information compiled, it was like, a kind of learn as you go. You would submit your documentation to one ministry, and then you'll be advised that you have to submit it to another ministry, and then you'll have to submit it to another ministry. So, I mean, I'm glad that there is some inclusiveness of the ministries, where that they're actually speaking to each other, because in all honesty, I feel that with Youth, Sport, and Recreation, all informations and things have to be corresponded between us and them. I feel that, they should be the ones that are guiding us and being very, very forthright with all the information that is coming out, not just say, okay, here you go, this is the document, but also having to keep up with us, the sporting bodies, and letting us know that this is the stage that we're at. This is what you can do and what you cannot do, because while we do have this document, it's now like a waiting game, because then you have to go back and state, okay, are we able to do this? Are we not able to do this? So, I'm okay with the document. I think where my issue comes into play is understanding at what stage we are within that document.
Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Earl and Jason. I echo everything that the others have said for the most part. I mean, there are a lot of great energy has been put into it. The community is mostly safe, and on balance, we should all be happy, ish. I think that there's some issues and a lot of confusion in terms of the stuff that's come out, and like nobody else has mentioned yet the fact that today that document was revised, and now when you get back to competition, everybody, including officials, has to have a saliva PCR test
And retest it every 30 days.
every 30 days, and you have to get it done 3 days before competition. So, and you know, I don't break these rules. I'm just following them. I'm trying to be a good little boy and, you know, do what we're told. But, you know, back in the summer, Donna helped, you know, she shared her document, Keith shared his document on terms of the return to play stuff. So there was a lot of collaboration going on in the sports to try to get an understanding of how this was going to impact our operations, and then what could we do that would fit, allow us to continue to operate in some level within the government's guidelines, or not guidelines, regulations. And so everybody did that. I have a little certificate around here somewhere that printed from the health department saying that you are permitted to have your plan's been submitted. I'm like, woohoo, you know, but that's out the window. Because now we go through youth and sport, which is fine. I mean, they're obviously acting as a central area for collecting some of this info. But the impression I get from the document is, like Donna, you know, my sport doesn't fit into some of the terminology that they're using, which is more inclined towards team sports. And, you know, and on one hand, you know, that document says, there is no competition in sport going on right now. I mean, it's pretty clear. Like, no one has said we're in the competition phase. Anybody reporting on a tennis match lately or tennis tournament? Earl.
Yes.
Right? I mean, they are competing. So we don't have a definition for the breadth of sport that says what competition, what characteristics of a competition allow us to have that event or not. And I'm not slighting my, you know, friends in tennis. In my house, you don't say bad things about tennis right after cycling. But it's a, you know, but, you know, some people, oh, well, it's just two guys on the opposite end of a court. Well, that's two neighbors going to play tennis. A competition has officials, it has a tournament desk, it has, you know, so even though we think it's maybe a tennis match, are we defining the event or the competition just as the field of play, the court that the ball that next to it, that it rolls into? You know, like, and maybe tennis has been through this process, but this afternoon we got another version of the return to competition, return to play document, and it's just this broad generic document. And I'm not sure if it maybe tennis is in phase 4 or stage 4 or whatever they want to call it, and cycling is maybe in phase 2 and rugby is still in phase 1, or, you know, I don't know, and I'm a little you know, dumbfounded as to how we're going to operate in this. And as you know, we would like to return to competition. We have a model that we used back in November that worked well. You know, it was a lot of administration. The numbers are smaller now, and we have to manage that. But I think we could still run the exact same arrangement that we had in the Arboretum at other locations for mountain bike races, restricting the field to a certain size. But I don't feel that I'm getting that guidance. And to be honest, it's going to require a lot of just one-on-one discussion with the department. But as a policy document, I think it's a little lacking. I hate to say it, but yeah. I'd like to see it. You know, like someone have said, okay, we recognize that sports fall into different categories. Let's put you in these columns and determine what characteristics relate to a track and field meet. Yeah.
Well, you would be referring to people that kind of are interested in sports, and I don't think the health department and the national security department are really interested in making sure that sports are treated as an individual sport as opposed to lumping you all into one, as we've seen this happen. So
Yeah, but we have an agent, you know, we have the Department of Youth, Sport and Recreation who are sportsmen, they're sports advocates. Not only is it their job, but it's their passion. And I think they understand that. It's just that this is going to take a ton of administrative work on someone's part. I mean, who's going to show up at a mountain bike race and make sure everyone's had a negative test? Like, am I allowed to? That's that's private medical records, which we don't, you know, we have a policy in cycling. I'm sure it's the same in all others for training or others. It's like, if you've traveled in the last 8 days, and actually we've been using 14 days, we don't want to see you. If you're quarantined, we don't want to see you. We're putting those extreme conditions on, and we ask those questions, as Earl would know from our race that we had in November. Like, there's a whole checklist you have to go through, and you have to sign off of it. But now we're asking people, you know, are they going to have to prove it, or do we just say, tell me? And how many sportsmen are out there? You know, I mean, I asked David Sabir from BFA this afternoon, and he said, well, there are at least 3,000 football people, you know, and so you add in, a couple hundred track athletes and, 100 cyclists and, I don't know, 1,500 field hockey players, and an equal number of netball, and like how's the structure going to work? And it's a bit of an administrative, nightmare. And I'm also looking at a calendar that's coming soon. I want to have an event at the end of January that's completely COVID protected.
Yeah. Keith?
Evening, everyone. I mean, obviously, I get the last. I'm down at the bottom, so everyone said their piece, and I think it's repeatable across the board. Obviously, we can't. Can we fault the department for this document? Partially, I think. As you've said, all the NSGBs have sent in their documentation on how their phased approach to get back to sports is. Even the simplest thing was, they could have copy and pasted all of those into one big document, and it would have been sport related for every single sport, right? Like you said, track and field could be back at phase 4. We're back. I mean, we can't do competitions till phase 4. And, as Peter said, it just came out tonight where everyone has to be tested every 30 days. The government's doing, what are they doing? 900 tests a day. Now you add on the number of sport people that have to be done. The school kids aren't being tested, but the school kids are in their own little bubbles. You're now breaking bubbles when you're back at competitions. We get that. So yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I get it, and it will become. COVID added an extra layer of administrative work for us. We had to have, an extra body just to do contact tracing, temperature checks for everyone who showed up for either training or any of the games. Now you're asking somebody to say, well, now I need to keep a database of, when was the last time you were tested? You need to show me your test, and I need to check the box to say you tested. And if not, you need to leave the field. You're now asking people to become, I wouldn't say aggressive, but I don't know the word. I'm not, but somebody, for me, it's easy. I can stand in front of somebody and say, you need to leave. But, if I ask a mom to do it as a volunteer, she'd have a hard time trying to kick people out of the stadium. So yeah, I get it. I mean, around the world, we're all having these issues, but, 3 pages? Is it 3 pages, this document? Yeah. It's only a couple pages long, and again, it's very, very broad. When we all sent stuff in, in August. And as Peter said, back in August, Peter contacted me because he didn't know what the process was. Yet, Youth and Sport could have contacted Peter and Sabir and said, could you send this out to all your sports bodies? We know who your sport body presidents are. This is your process. This is how you do it. This is what the document should look like. I mean, this was August of last year. We're now January. right? Months later, I would have thought that they'd be a little bit more prepared. And I get it. I mean, everyone's busy and everyone's got a lot of work to do. But if this is their job, it's you speak to Maceo, then has to speak to the Department of Health. I mean, I spoke in August. I think I spoke to 3 different departments just to get something signed off to say yes, we can go back. And I got a verbal saying yes, you can go back. And then I think a month later, I got my certificate. So.
Yeah, that's not unusual. That part's not unusual, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think they knew.
When we come back, we're gonna get Jason to jump in with a few questions. We'll be right back.
Perrier water has been renowned worldwide for over a century and a half. Collected from a pristine ancient mineral water spring in the south of France, originally bottled in a distinctive green pear-shaped bottle, and distributed in Bermuda by John Barry & Son Limited, our foremost beverage distributor, Refreshing Perrier is the champagne of mineral waters. Try Perrier water in bold, natural fruit flavors with no added sugar and 0 calories. This month, we're featuring peach, strawberry, watermelon, orange, pink grapefruit, lime, cucumber, and regular Perrier water in cans. Lindos, why go anyplace else?
Jay?
Hey guys, I'm looking at the document last week, even though we've been told now there's a revised document, a third one I believe it is now. But what was consistent in the first 2 documents was stage or phase 4 and return to competition. Now that for the most part included spectators. And I had asked a question when we had, I believe, another sport on regarding, actually I asked a friend of ours who cricket, would they return to sport without spectators? Now we're talking with some sports who doesn't really have that many spectators. Are you looking to return to competition without spectators, just trying to keep a safer environment?
Jason, I'll jump in and I'll answer that because my answer is very quick. When we have track meets, the only spectators that we have, if we have spectators, is the parents. We're not a big spectator sport.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, the only time we get a lot of spectators is if we have Carifta Games or an event. Otherwise than that, we really don't have that problem with spectators. And again, when I listened to the discussion last week, a lot of it was pertaining to football. And again, that's why I kept questioning, is this document prepared for football or is it prepared for sports across the board? Because, they kept talking about, the number of spectators that come to football games. And I'm thinking, well, what about, track? What about cycling? What about some of these other events that don't have tons of spectators? So we can't return to competition because they're talking about spectators when we're a sport that don't have many spectators.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the critical thing is the spectators and that element of it is critical for the existence of the host clubs. And I'm not don't say that's not important or not critical, but there's gate revenue for those events. There's a canteen or possibly a bar revenue. There's different revenue streams that don't exist at a cycling event. Generally don't happen at a track meet. And so these things are components that people are worrying about, but again, because they haven't segmented the perspective on sport. And I think my primary driver is how are we giving our athletes or our participants the opportunity to fulfill themselves in sporting capacity. I don't feel that it's my mandate in cycling or broadly in sport to fulfill the satisfaction of the spectators. My primary goal is always going to be the athletes. And so allowing them to be on the field of competition, even if there was a scaled down version of rugby or even football. I mean, I know football, you have 11 on the side, 3 referees, okay, you're done for your 25. But, is your bench actually in that same event? And, are there ways to run it? But of course, there's an expectation that we're going to have, 150 spectators at PHC, or that's legitimately in the grounds, or 100 or more, plus the ones who are watching from the railway trail. these are considerations that don't impact our sport. And we had this back in the summer. My field of play and Donna's field of play for like a road race, we're not all occupying, like if we have a 15-mile circuit, people, that's pretty spread out. The people live a lot closer than 15 miles apart. There are churches that are half a mile apart and that are a lot more people in them. So, I think that, that a little more tailored approach to the breadth of the document, to me, it would make more sense. And given that this is the third iteration that we've had in this month, in the last 20 days, maybe there's a fourth iteration that would be have a little more clarity for it. I'm not trying to be glib about it, but I think that that it has to be a work in progress.
Yeah. It actually, if you read it, phase 1 and phase 2 are the only phases that say no fans. It actually does not state in phase 3 that you can't have fans.
Yeah, but it's still subject to the maximum of 25 people total.
Or the maximum. Yeah, it's subject to the maximum size of the area. So if they double it to 50, then you've got 25 people on your team and 25 people in the stands.
And I guess my question for phase 3, which I asked Maceo, what exactly is competitive training? We don't have competitive training in track and field. We either train or we compete. So phase 3, he has competitive training. And I asked the question, what exactly is competitive training? Because we don't have that phase at all.
So what's the answer?
He said, I'm going to bring it up and see. Because I have it.
Yeah, I think for you, Donna, it's more of a you guys don't have recreational training. You're just training. Like you're not, again, there are sports that can just do it for fun. But you guys train for a purpose. And I think that's what again, it has to be sport specific because you could have, I see a guy, he comes out every Tuesday night and picks up his javelin and goes on the field and throws his javelin, but he's training for a competition.
Exactly.
So
exactly. This is what the answer was. Your sports is non-contact. So what is relevant during each stage is the number that is allowed to train together.
So that would be just the guidelines based on where we are as per the government.
Yeah, but competitive training, that's the answer, but that doesn't really answer my question. Right. What is competitive?
It says to me that the sole delineator is 25 people, or it's currently 10. Tomorrow I think it goes to 25, and that's the driver. And so 25 people, I can have a mountain bike race. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have chunks. I have one race, they finish, they go the next race. And all within 25, or we'll see a results page that has.
But Peter, you raised a good point earlier when you said competition. So that has to be also kind of sorted out as well, isn't it?
It's interesting because when they say competitive training, right? I could say that for some of the juniors and some of the top guys who have aspirations to go and race somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Every any one of the Fat Tire Massive, One Communications mountain bike series races is competitive training. It's a competitive environment, but they're training, and it's like everything. Like we create a calendar for a performance or training calendar. That has A races and B races and C races. C races are just training races. And that's like 90% of what gets reported in local news. And everybody, depending where they're trying to peak, where their peak performance is, their A race may never be in Bermuda. It may be Caribbean Championships or World Championships or at something else. So, this is where we're dancing around a lot of terminology or words, but I think that from the public health standpoint, and the virus doesn't really care if it's training or competitive training or competition.
Competition.
The virus wants to get you, and we need to protect ourselves from that situation.
Yeah, there's too many, like you said, the document's too broad, too gray. As Peter, and I'll go back to Peter because he loves to have this argument. If you looked at phase 3, it says no competition between teams and other groups. Well, a mountain bike race is one-on-one, right? There's no teams. You're not riding in a group. There's no pelotons riding around. It's Dominic versus Caden. It's one-on-one. So does that fit into that? That doesn't really fit because it's not a team or a group, it's individuals. Same thing with running races. I mean, when we started with this, when I was talking to my old man, I was, this whole wave stuff just drove me nuts. I was like, if you got 500 people, bring them to the start, ready, set, go. By the time you hit 100 meters, they're all spread out. So,
that's absolutely true for those running events. And then you get in a bubble. If it's a 10K, 1 kilometer in, you're in your bubble.
Yeah.
You might try to beat each other. The guy 50 yards up the road, you might oh, maybe I'll get him. But otherwise, you're never seeing, back in the day, you're not going to see Jay Donowa again, No.
But you don't see groups of 20. You don't see groups of 20 people coming across the finish line. It's they're ones and twos or three. It's very small groups.
Yeah.
So put a mask on, start, see you later, take it off after about 10 feet, and then you're into what they consider you don't have to wear a mask if you're in a actually physically doing activity. Same with gyms and stuff like that. So I think they could have done more work. I mean, I think we're all dancing around the same thing. I think they could have taken all our documents, shoved it into the same piece of paper, had a little bit more, granularity in terms of the different sport types, and gone from there. It would have been a nightmare, absolutely. Administrative wise, it probably would have been a nightmare, but I think that we could be back sooner. I've had to break up my sports. The kids, we've got a group of girls that train, and there's 22 of them. So last week I had to break them out into 2-3 different little groups, just to get them back onto the field. So
Well,
Monday.
The question for me really quickly is that, are we guided by what the government is saying, or are we guided by requesting permission from youth, sport, and recreation? Because there are some sports that aren't participating or aren't training or aren't doing anything at all based on the government guidelines. In our case, we basically went out to youth, sport, and recreation and have requested, like, when can we return to these guidelines? Because it was worded in a to the effect as if we had to get permission from them before we can start and kick off our sports. And it sounds to me like some sports are actually training and some sports aren't. I mean, going back to our OTS show last Wednesday, Minister Peets, obviously, spoke to the fact of training with, a small group of 10. So where did this permission come from? Who do we have to get permission from? Or are we just guided by what government is stating? And us basically adjusting our training sessions and things like that based on whatever the guidelines are based on what government states.
And I think with us, that's what we did. I mean, as they say that we have to have, 10 groups of 10. So our clubs are training, but they're training together in groups of 10. We had an occasion, I think it was this week or last week, when there was a ton of people that were at the stadium, and we got an email from Craig Terrell right away saying, hold up, you can only train in groups of 10. So we have continued training. I mean, we have athletes that go to the beach. We have athletes that go to the Arboretum. We're getting ready for some international meets that we're hoping are going to take place. So our athletes really couldn't, and we're right in now getting in the midst of competition. So we really couldn't stop, and then tomorrow we're going to start back up. So our athletes continue to train, but again, it's an individual sport. You could go out for a run, you could go to the track, do some 800s by yourself, do some 200s by yourself. So we're able to continue. Whereas again, it's different for a team sport. And going back to what Keith said, I think the document should have had an index. Every sport, athletics, I should be able to go to that index and say, okay, let me turn to athletics and let me see what my guidelines are. because my guidelines are going to be different. I think they should have written that if it's a sport, youth and sport department, it should have been specific to each sport. And as I said, they could have just had an index at the front to say athletics, find your information on page 20. Because again, we can return to competition as soon as they say you can now have 25 people. We can go up National Stadium and have a competition. Again, we will always skip stage 3 because we don't have competitive training, and we can go straight to stage 4, return to play, and only have races with less than 25 people or less than 10 people. So I think it should have been broken out by sport. And I mean, they know the sport, like you said, they know the presidents. They could have contacted you and say, and they already have our documents to say, from a broad standpoint, this is, what your sport should do. But I agree, with what everybody said. Kudos, they are trying to come together, put something out, for us to follow. But this, to me, is confusing us more than it's making it, clear. It's clear as mud, as they say.
and I'm going off, I'm going off of the premise that the document that I presented and had signed off in August is the one that I'm going to use. The only thing that is determining what I can do is basically group sizes.
Excellent.
Or, for us, the NSC requires, if you travel or whatever, you have 14 days, and then they moved it to 8, and then they move it back to 14. So, there's always those little gaps or little areas where you make small adjustments. But I think, like I said, we all have our documents on how we're going to proceed with the sport. We should almost, I'm going to go off of that. As soon as they allow something, there's always wiggle room. Now, you're right. They just need to, fine tune it and put it all together, because it is like you said, it's very broad and confusing for a lot of sports who, like archery's out there.
Exactly.
Right. Pickleball's out there. I think we saw about, when there was only 10, I think I saw 15 people down at Horizons pickleball court, all standing around playing pickleball. So, yeah. But are there, is it a sport?
Well, you're not supposed to go there. You're not supposed to go there as an ambassador for sport.
It's a great sport.
There's a list. There's a list, and I have it. But I think the challenge still comes down to just like it's put in phases, and we've been accustomed in the last 9 months or 10 months that we've been going through with the coronavirus, that we're used to the terminology. Oh, we're in phase 1 or this, that, like in terms of what we can do. But the real critical number for this is how many people can we have at an event, and then can we maintain social distancing, contact tracing if necessary. It's easy for me if the only people who come to a race are the ones who register, and they register using Keith's online system. I've already got their contacts and all that information. So it's the maintain contact tracing. We have a health check in advance. So we're doing all those things. Once they get inside the race course, who cares if it's training or a competition or a competitive? There's nothing in the coronavirus that cares whether you're training or you're competing. So having the competitions should be dictated by, do you have enough people to create a competitive environment? And if it's a time trial on a bike, that's one person. If it's mountain biking, which is very spread out, you could just tell me that the maximum number is 25 in a race. And we'll have one race, get rid of those people, bring another 25, have another. Yep. So I think that the document's going to help shape our policy, but I think in the way it's tiered is making us think that, could cycling be in phase, the competition phase? But it turns out that someone else isn't. In which case, you say we need separate individuals.
I don't see an issue with that. I really don't see an issue with each sport, being in different phases. Yeah, I think that's a valid conversation.
Well, certainly.
Well, I do want to take a commercial break, but when I come back, I want you three, because you're more contact sports, Sean, Kamal, and Keith. With schools going back in, and I'm hearing from Peter that you're required to have your athletes be tested every 30 days. They're going to get tested in competition and then go into a school phase to come back out and do a sport. How do you plan, or how does that work for you and your sport? We'll be right back.
This month, we're featuring a range of infant and baby care products from Hello Bello, a company started up by a husband and wife team who were inspired to meet the challenges arising from the often surprising, not to mention messy, experiences that came with the territory known as parenting. The couple behind Hello Bello know that being a parent is uniquely demanding, and their mission is to bring you premium products at gentle prices. Try Hello Bello Apple Blossom Baby Lotion, Lavender Shampoo and Body Wash, Flushable Wipes, Diaper Rash Cream, Lavender Bubble Bath, and more. Lindo's. Why go anyplace else?
Camille, let me let you answer that first.
For me, I'm really concerned first and foremost because are these tests, regular tests, going to be free? Are they going to be, with that requirement, is that going to be an added expense that us, the sporting organizations, are going to have to undertake? Because it certainly doesn't state, because I just had a brief just now since Peter mentioned it, it doesn't state that it's going to be covered or anything like that. Now, the thing about it is, why is all the onus is going on us, the sporting bodies? Because, like you said, they're going to be in school, they're going to be working, they're going to be, potentially could be traveling via public transportation. They could be in and around persons in indoor clubs that are now allowed to be open with flat or bar and restaurants. So why is all the onus is going to go on us, the sporting bodies, and how are we supposed to manage that? I mean, I come from an insurance background, and I'm saying, confidentiality is very, very important. How do we, even when you look at the government announcements or the press releases, they never state any individual information. When I look at everyone here, I don't think that any of us probably have more than 500 persons. And let's be realistic, on a day when an event is taking place, it's probably less than 100 players. So how are we supposed to even keep that information confidential in reference to getting test results? I mean, if someone comes and they say, okay, yes, I tested positive, then now we're required to basically notify, the government that we have somebody that's tested positive in our organization. I just feel like, I don't know, we're constantly moving the goalposts, for lack of a better word, and we're just trying to figure this all out as we go along. I say maybe, I don't know who is actually on the committee or makes up any of the committees. I feel that maybe some of us from different sports should basically be a part of this, so that some of these questions can be asked, and some of these things have already been addressed in our documents. So I just can't seem to understand it. I don't feel that we should be required to do that at all.
Sean?
Yeah, there's a lot of frustrations with this. Certainly, our plan does not incorporate a testing sort of requirement. One sort of has to sort of scratch their head and go, so I get tested on the first of the month. I go to school, I go to work, I do all sorts of exposures, and on the 28th of the month, I test positive. Where, who am I sort of going to notify, and who's at risk, and all that contacting. So I for one, I'm struggling with the sort of the benefits of this once a month testing. Rugby, I think I just wanted to add sort of a comment to the discussion earlier. Our plan is all about group sizes, and then after the group sizes, what the activities are. And with rugby, it's full face-to-face contact is at the extreme end. We can go individually to the gym and work out and build bulk and strength and whatever. I mean, it's a very difficult conundrum to solve. I think that from what I can decipher from my colleagues here, a little bit more consultation, and maybe we've all submitted these plans, so they just need to sort of go through the plans and go, Donna, your team's here, Sean, you're here, Peter, you're here. That's what the government will support. But ultimately, the decision of where your sport lies in the return plan lies with the executive. And what I'm concerned about is that I have some elements of rugby who are fed up. They want to get back to playing rugby. And, they may not listen to, me saying, look, we're not doing this, because they're going to say government says we're here. And that's, where I'm concerned. I mean, back in December, we were literally a week away from returning to competition. And then I heard that things weren't going so well at a certain club up in Southampton. And that's where we were going to be playing. And I said, I pulled the handbrake. And sure enough, 3 days later, and it all came out. And we went back to, our phase 2. So, I commend the youth and sports trying to do something positive. But I think what they need to do, just like most government entities, they need to work more closely with its national sports governing bodies. That's a cry that we've said multiple times on multiple different areas. And to me, it's for our plan, we look as where we are as a country. So, where we were at, I think, was sporadic outbreaks. And then it was community clusters. And, that language sort of guided us as to where we were on our plan. And so really, I think there needs to be a rethink about maybe they say the country is at this space. And these are the things that we're comfortable with, group sizes. And then the national sports bodies can sort of integrate their plans with that framework. But right now, I'm like, I think Ms. Evans makes a very good point, with testing. You're going to have an influx of people going in there testing. And are they getting tested because they're at high risk, or is it just a tick box exercise? And then how good, what's the worth of that tick box exercise? So, I mean, we'll work our way through it. Certainly rugby at this stage, we're not doing anything this weekend. And we're going to have some meetings with our youth committee and the club representatives and our executive. Well, we've reached out to Maceo and to sort of, ask for further clarity around things. And we'll get through this. And I think we'll all get through it eventually. But I think we can't lose sight of the fact that none of us as heads of our sport want to be the sport that's responsible for a massive spread because of irresponsible sort of decision making.
I think adding the testing component is going to lead to either it, and I hate to be this guy, but it's going to lead to one of two things. People are either not going to test, so you're not going to get to sports, or the alternative is people are going to go back to sports unsanctioned. There's nothing to stop 20 guys getting on a field to play rugby, right? I go down to wherever, pick up a rugby ball and start playing. Unless the cops show up and stop me, then it's an unsanctioned event, right? So it's the same thing with field hockey. I can't stop people from renting the National Stadium field. It's their field. I want to play netball. I'll just go down to the netball, pick up a ball and start playing. Somebody can say, well, why are you playing? Don't you know the policy? I'm just here to play. I don't know anything about any policies or anything. So Yeah, and it's you could make it worse, but because like Sean says, if he's got frustrated people who want to go back to play, what's going to stop them from playing? You know, he can say you shouldn't do it, and then they go, yeah, okay, great, I'm going to go back and play. And he just goes, you know, if somebody questions him, he says, I don't know anything about it. I advise them. So
And Keith, it's a little bit more insidious with they can turn around and say, well, government have said that if I have a test, I'm okay to go.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so yeah. I mean, we'll work through it. I think Donna sort of indicated that, you know, really who is this for? And, you know, is it for the big, you know, number one sport on the island? And then everyone else sort of follows in behind. Unfortunately, you know, David's not here, and I'm pretty sure he would have some colorful comments to that. But you know, look, you know, we're all in the same boat. We're all trying to do what's best, and certainly Earl needs us to get back to work so he has a job.
Trust me, unlike other people, there's enough sports going on around the world for Bermudians doing, and on the island, so it's enough. Don't worry.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I mean I've got some colleagues here who are with the BOA, and the National Sports Governing Body Association, and we're all trying to work together to resolve this horrible situation. I mean, we've got the Olympics allegedly coming up, and we're still like waiting for a big decision. Is it or isn't it? You know what I mean? And so if that's at something as big as the Olympics, I mean, it sort of makes our Mariners playing Renegades on Sunday is a little bit of like,
minor. Yeah, exactly.
Minor, you know. So
and I think at the end of the day, it's about our athletes. Yeah. I mean, what we do as a sporting body is about our athletes. And as you said, we don't want to be, neither one of us want to be the sporting body who ends up having this big COVID outbreak. And I think we're all sensible enough to make sure that we put in place what needs to be in place, which is why we all put together our documents. You know, I do know, unfortunately, you know, it was a sporting event that had to break out. And I think maybe that's why they're getting so tight on this with, you know, taking tests. But, you know, maybe they're going a bit overboard with it. But at the end of the day, it's about our athletes. And if we're not careful, we're not going to have any athletes. You know, sports going to go down the tubes because the athletes will be frustrated, especially if they're trying to get ready for something like Sean said, the Olympics, you know, other events. Then they're going to say, forget sports altogether. And we're going to have a worse community because these young people that we have that we're trying to guide and direct are going to go out in the public and do a whole lot of foolishness. And Sean, your office is going to be very, very busy.
The professional office, yeah.
Exactly, because as you know, sports help some of these young people to get off of the streets. I think we all know that. Yeah. And if we get so tight that they can't do what they love and enjoy, then our community is going to be worse for it. And I think, you know, these guys coming up with this type of guidelines need to keep that in mind. And I think most of them are sports people, so kind of surprised that they'll come up with something like this. We always have to keep in the back of our mind that we're in this for the athletes. It's not about us, it's about the athletes. And as I said, I don't think any of us want to lose our athletes.
Right, and I think that we may be looking at it.
I think it's going to be very important that, as most of you have recommended, that the bodies, the youth and sport, national security, and the health department look at your individual documents and put you in the tiers in which you should be in as the government move into the phases, and treat each sport differently or according to how they actually operate. So I think having a conversation as a group with the powers that be in these to make them understand your points, because obviously you could almost indicate that these people are sitting in a room coming up with an idea of what happens in the professional world, because we look down the line and we could see how national basketball, the NBA is working, how baseball worked, how NFL worked, how all this stuff worked, and lumping you guys using that sort of criteria thrown into your organizations that kind of just doesn't suit you because you're not doing it full time. We have amateurs, we have some professionals, but they have their own way of working around their requirements. But primarily, we have the amateurs, and we want to make sure that in some way, shape, or form, we can get back to some safe sports. So I want to thank you all for joining this evening, sharing your thoughts, your opinions, and we want to wish you all the best. I would imagine that the document that Peter indicated will start tomorrow. Is it 21st?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I think the 25, the number of 25 goes tomorrow, I think, and then the document is basically with immediate effect, unless someone's got a midnight basketball game to go to. But which I'm sure there is. But I'm just, so the way that they've been coming out is like it's basically
midnight. You can't go out at midnight.
Don't tell anyone.
11, Peter, 11.
Yeah, 11.
Yeah.
Yeah, 11.
Well, again, I want to thank you all, and do enjoy your night. When we come back, Jason and I will wrap up this edition of the Island Stat Sports Show. Do enjoy your night, folks.
Thanks, Darryl. Thanks, Jason. Cheers.
Go Macro started up at the beginning of the millennium in Wisconsin in the U.S. with macrobiotic farming in mind, motivated by the pursuit of health through balanced nutrition. Go Macro is a family-owned company dedicated to living and promoting a natural, whole food-based lifestyle. Like most whole food businesses, Go Macro is also dedicated to bringing you the flavors they love. This month, we're featuring Go Macro Vegan Organic Granola and Coconut, Sunflower Seed Butter and Chocolate, and Coconut Almond Butter Chocolate Chip Macro Bars. Lindos, why go anyplace else?
And welcome back. Well, Jay, very interesting conversation, but a lot of it's similar because they would have the same issues, the non-contact sport, where it comes to the contact sport, similar problems of not being classified, which is a big issue would be for many.
Yeah, like I mentioned last week, man, with this virus, the goalposts will keep moving. We don't expect the virus to disappear no time soon. So I see this being revised. But I think the most important part is having a consultation with all the stakeholders in making these decisions. Obviously, I know most of them had input, producing a document for the Ministry of Health to approve. But there's a few things that came out of tonight's conversation. And one thing, we had mentioned this probably about a month ago, COVID anxiety. Just from people in general.
Yeah.
Just from people in general. Put sports aside. The willing and the wanting to get to some type of normalcy, because now we're almost getting close to a year of being in a state that's been abnormal.
Yeah.
So I believe that's playing a large role. Plus, you listen to every sporting body, they've got maybe international commitments, things of that nature. It's gonna be tricky. One thing we had mentioned last week with Maceo and PS and the minister, when they talked about one of the reasons why they changed the name from phase to stage.
Yeah.
It did not align with the government's phases. So what I'm hearing from tonight's conversation, everybody's under the assumption that it is aligning with the government's four-prong phases. So that's something that has to be clarified amongst. And then testing. We know the testing works to the point where there is a bubble. Because we mentioned it last week. The ideal will be, obviously, when you see in the professional level, people testing going into a bubble, and regardless. But we're in an amateur setting. That's not number one. It's going to be the administrative work and the financial situation that's going to make that happen. That's going to be a headache if that's even going to happen. Also, what happens now with vaccines?
Mm.
Because that's going to be something that obviously we're in the midst of folks getting vaccines. How does that play? What if, for the sake of argument, you're one of the sports, the non-contact sports, or riders, because you're probably traveling or whatever, or you want to travel, you're going to go take that vaccine, but then when you come back, you're not going to be a lot. Like, how does that work in a non-contact? So that information of pertaining to each particular sport is going to be vital of going forward, and that is something that we'll have to keep talking. We'll have to keep talking.
Yeah. I think when we talk about the vaccine part, I think this is where it's going to be very important for these sporting bodies to get in with those three ministries and hash it out, because you're going to have, remember, they run their elected officials to run the organization. So they're going to have people within their organization that will say, oh, I'll get the vaccine. Does that clear me from having to get tested every month? Or do I still have to get tested? You know, all that has to, because they have to take this back to their membership. And I think having that conversation openly amongst the sporting bodies with not just youth in sport, but also because these guidelines are administered by the health department and the national security, to ensure that their voices are heard in their individual sport. And Donna made a valid point by saying that in the documentation that comes out, it should be an index. And I'm pretty sure when they go through an index, they will say to themselves, oh, okay, well, cycling looks similar to track and field. So those two could be, and then you have martial arts, non-contact martial arts.
Yeah.
So their index would be, similar to because you have those sports that actually are non-contact. Now, there is a form of martial arts that is contact. Obviously a sport like boxing would have to go into stage 4, but that's not a team sport. You know what I mean? And then the other thing that has to be stressed, and we brought it up last week and we'll keep bringing it up. Are we waiting until you're going to allow fans to get back into competition, which I think get the athletes back into playing. We'll sort that other stuff out after.
One thing we didn't mention tonight, and we brought up on previous shows, that I think plays going into the decision of what are we allowed is the venues and the facilities to have the social distance and the spacing that we're going to need. Track and field, obviously, that stadium's got a lot of room up there. But once again, I'm always going to lean to the side of, once again, before the event and after the event.
Yeah.
Because obviously during the event, I'm pretty sure you're going to have everybody from each sport say, hey, I need you guys to do this. I need you people to go here, that, whatever. But once that person knocks off, say, you know what I'm saying?
This is, well, hearing what Peter and Keith were saying with the new document that's coming out, you are required to have a test 3 days before competition and once a month. Yes? That's what I heard. I think I heard that.
Yeah.
But check this out. So I go have a test and I'm negative 3 days before the competition, right? But I get in somebody's car that brings me to the game. There's no test in there. So stop goes the temperature check. Stop goes all these things that were in place coming into this form of staging, and now we don't know that person's got it until, because everybody's saying, I don't need to go back to get tested because I got to go back at the end of the month unless I feel bad. So it's a lot of that work. The document has to be broken down to the amateur status, and the only way to do that is to get the presidents of these national sports governing bodies in the same room or on the same call discussing their sporting paperwork and what they're required to do, and then have those ministries or whomever basically allow them to submit a game, or just have them resubmit that form that they have already.
They already have it on file.
Right, but I'm saying, well, you know how it is. Just read.
What I'm saying, they have it on file, and for those sports who are approved to start up, right? So if there needs to be an amendment of sort, if there was a breakout of some sort at one of those sports or whatever, then okay, take that sport and do the amendments to help offset so that doesn't happen again. But all the other sports shouldn't have to go through that process again, which has already been done. They've already been given the green.
But we're under the impression, right? We're under the impression that the three ministries have the documentation from each of their sports.
Okay, true.
Yeah.
Well, but the national health, wouldn't that have to the final say?
Well,
the health, and then the national security officer. So I'm thinking the national security would deal with the people and the venue and everything around it. Because take for instance, if we're looking at my world, you don't want to go have an event, you got to go to make sure the national
security ministry,
to make sure you get the X amount of numbers. Okay.
Right.
Now,
so you go to national security. Do you go to health?
Well, so the health will come in as far as the protocols to.
Yeah, but national security would go on the list and say, okay, you're having this. So they don't need to be informed. You see what I'm saying? How simple that could be. You know what I mean? So I just think, having the three in the room, and you might be surprised. We didn't know that.
Yeah,
you know how good it's like. Somebody would say, "Well, we didn't know that."
It's hard to say. I mean, like I said, everybody said it earlier, but nobody wants to be that guy. But it's hard to push back on this notion of this testing because. The testing, and I'm going to state it again, the testing, I see the relevance of the testing if you're trying to form an actual bubble.
Right.
And when I say a bubble, you have to stay in this bubble for a long period of time, not just for a couple of hours.
Listen.
Once again,
a lot of these rules were put in place for the 3 professional events that came to Bermuda. It's put in place for the next professional event that's coming to Bermuda.
Okay, so
they can do that in that environment.
Okay, so say that.
Well, no, they're not going to say that. You know why? Because they don't want to tell you it's rules for them and it's rules for us.
But that's really
so they're trying to lump you in the rules for them to make sure that they get what they need.
Because if take for instance, I'm just going to use golf because we spoke with the organizers of the event extensively before that tournament. What was the protocols? What protocols they were coming from other tournaments, and obviously a lot of their stuff, those protocols from those other tournaments led to the protocols that were being here, right? Creating that bubble, or even having mostly everybody at one particular hotel.
Yeah. Everything was put in place for them to be in a so-called bubble atmosphere.
Now, take for instance, and I'm going to keep saying this here, that's a professional event with plenty of sponsorship. So we can't even compare apples and apples when it comes to our amateur local sports.
Nope.
And to have
how we can't even get support from the people who say that they're for sports and sports tourism. We have restaurant week, but you ever heard of Sport Week? You ever heard them promote a local sport of even the sport that they want to sponsor? You haven't heard that. So that, but those are the type of things that kind of frustrate me when you start talking about we're looking at or listening to the new documentation puts it into a fact that we've had professional events on the island or events on the island that they could create a bubble that the athletes could stay in and be in that environment for the duration of their event, and then on their way they go. Where we have amateur level people that because schools in because people had to go to work. That's what was said. You got to get the kids back into school because the parents have to go out and make money because the government can't afford to keep paying people to stay home with their kids. Okay, fine. But they're not looked at the fact that at some sporting events, I'll even, some sporting events, they have a little top shop. You know what I mean? They have big sales so people, so the sport can make money. You know what I mean? Those small things are not thought of. They're not. They're put on the back burner because it's not for them. That's not a significant thing.
See, you're talking about two different things there, because the sport is the actual playing of the sport.
Right.
Going to the event.
Right. But that's what I'm trying to say. They're lumped this into an event as opposed to a sport.
Yeah.
Right. That was the point that I was making.
Yeah. It's got so many layers. And
Yeah.
I said last week, I hate to be the minister because.
But if you get the conversation going, everybody could have their say, and at least whether or not they agree or disagree, at least they'll feel as if their voices have been heard, they've been able to be listened to, and they would come away with some sort of, I understand what I'm doing now. You know what I mean? And it'd be clear. So as we've got a note here, sports are also be so true. So true, because I always say it, some kids, even some adults, need that sporting outlet. If not, they become a problem. And Donna said it, Sean's professional field.
I guess he's into that field, but I would say that, but even more now, Earl, because of the, I used to say it, some people feel like they're claustrophobic right now.
Yeah.
You know, whether you're home, working from home, you're living. I mean, some people now, they're glad to go back to work.
Yeah.
Like, who ever thought that?
Not there before the janitor, mate.
Like, man, I just want to get out of that house because, I'm doing, and it's, but even kids. And, Earl, I have a small one, and I was like, no, we got to go outside. We got to go outside and play because, to have you locked in this, you're going to drive everybody crazy. And but it's saying that the mental side, and that's why I keep saying that COVID anxiety. And so it's hard because we as fans or athletes, we really want to get back to some type of what we love, our passion.
Yeah.
And it's hard, and because if so many things not being taken into consideration, it becomes frustrating. So it's gonna be an ongoing thing. And Earl, and I'm gonna keep saying this, Earl. There's a line in that document that says downward numbers.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say per sport.
Right.
What the number would be ideal for that sport to, number one, start up or be competitive as in some sports is the same thing. So if it's not in line with the national guidelines as far as numbers, because it says you're going to take depending on the government's assessment.
Yeah.
So we're going into some type of our next phase tomorrow. But what number was it?
It should be stage 2, isn't it?
No, the number for it to be allowed, right? You see,
25.
Well, go to 25.
25. Yeah.
Okay. It's gonna be.
But and again, Peter raised that point. It's not competition.
Right. So, this is something that, and I believe the last week it was mentioned that to go on that government website to look at the indicators. And this is what I was saying last week. Each and every sport will have to take a good look at the indicators of where the island's at. To number one, to see if it's viable even starting up.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Can they put the things in place? Or how do they go about putting it in place because of the fact, and we're probably a lack of funds to do it. So
and actually Kamal made that point. It doesn't say who's paying for it. And I mean, how long can they keep doing testing for free?
And we're talking roughly close to 1,000 tests a day. So
Right. Well, well, remember,
and
if
that's
every sport, remember, if you have to get tested every 30 days, everybody's going to want to get tested leading into the month. So you might have a day where you probably have, if you lump all the sports together, looking to get a test in the month, at the beginning of the month, you might have close to 3,000 people a day trying to get a test.
I mean, my understanding of the testing, it will be aligned with the essential workers. I know some essential workers have to get tested, I believe, every 28 days or so.
Right, right.
So I believe, to me, that's what it sounds like. I could be wrong.
Right.
That's what it sounds like. It's saying that, you know, take for instance, and I'm just going to use a person in the service. Okay, we're going to get tested, but they're going to be put in many different locations, you know, around the island. So that's, you know, I mean,
I think one of the things that they would have to talk about before we go is what happens if I get the vaccine.
That's what I'm saying. So what, and as far as I keep, you know, learning about the vaccine, it's still not 100% now, is it?
Right, right.
So, I mean, where do we go?
Well, let's put it like this: we'll learn more tomorrow, and I guess in the coming days, the conversation will get louder, and I guess there will be some answers. There will be some,
before it gets louder. I just think there's more collaboration than we just said.
Yeah, but let's hope that is the issue: more collaboration, and these sports, their concerns are addressed, because not everybody goes into the same bucket because it's sport.
But like I said, I'm definitely optimistic. We will have some very competitive sports in the very, very near future. I think as a country, we're on the right track. We've sort of, well, obviously we're going into a different phase, so that obviously we're pulled down the community spread or whatever, the clusters. So, and I'm looking at probably last 5-6 days or so, most of the positive cases have been imported, and who will be under health monitoring. So for the most part, I think we're good there. And if we continue to do that as a country, I think we'll be back to more competitive sports. So.
Right. Well, I want to leave you with this number here. There were 875 test results received, and none were positive.
See, that speaks to what I just said there.
That was the latest from the government tonight. So, do we go to phase 4?
Oh, we can't. No. See, hold on. You won't go to phase 4, but we can go to stage 4 though.
Stage 4. Sorry, stage 4.
What I was on to last week, we can probably go.
That's right. We get 2 more. We get 3 days straight of zero.
We can skip through stages, but we can't skip through phases.
Phases. That's right. That was explained last week.
Well, like, hey, before we go, Earl. So we ended the last week conversation of sledging in the test world.
Oh yes. Did it come back to haunt them, or did
So the folks who didn't know, the test matches between Australia and India took place in Australia. And the third test, I believe, was, or the fourth test? Would have been the
third test.
Third test. The third test. During that test, the wicketkeeper, who was the captain of Australia, had a lot to say when they
caught on the stump mic.
Had a lot to say to the batsmen when Australia was in a very convincing position. Needless to say, they did not win the match. They drew the match, right?
Yeah, that ended in a draw.
Ended in a draw. But during the conversation, it says,
wait till I get you at the Gabba.
Wait till you get at the Gabba. Now,
you got him at the Gabba, all right?
Give you a little backstory. Australia has not lost a test match since 1988.
Against the West Indies. At the Gabba.
Wow. They were in a very, very, very strong position to win it.
What did it? 349 on the final day, right?
And Lord and behold, India with the captain, not
Yeah.
here because he was home.
Yeah,
with
7 regulars out of the team, 7 to 9
a bunch
regulars that can walk into the India team out of it.
bunch of youngsters, and needless to say, they pulled it through.
Mhm.
I just feel I'm wondering if I feel sorry for the Australian captain because now you're the first captain to lose at the Gala since 1980.
Sometimes it's better to leave the giant sleep. And
But not just him. Not
Mhm.
just him. There was a few pundits I read today. Michael Vaughan says he's got egg on his face.
yeah.
So sometimes, like you said, sometimes you just gotta leave. If you want, you gotta win it. You gotta be humble when you
And
win.
you can talk. Yeah.
You gotta be humble when you lose, because you never. And that's the beauty of sports, Earl.
Mhm.
I mean, I enjoyed the show last night, obviously, and you heard a lot of that also.
Yeah, definitely. One thing's for sure. I got a message from Jack who said, "Man, you made my week, man. Just reminiscing."
I don't think you know Jack.
Oh, I know it. Trust me, I know it. He'll be talking about this next month, this time.
Jack, my boy. And it's good. It's good because we mentioned, and we, very quickly, we mentioned about going to the Earl Boys game and whether it's cricket or football, and the ceremony afterwards when they're honoring former players.
Right.
And hear some of those stories, and I've been saying for years, we need to get these stories up because the name dropping.
Yeah.
And like, who would have known that certain players would have been, that was the idol? You know what I'm saying? When you listened to Dennis Brown last night, that he was my idol, or he was my idol, and then you start hearing some of those strong names from years gone, the Donald Danes and all these guys. Yeah, these guys influence, and we talked about that with the late Gabby Hart.
Yeah,
she influenced a lot of people. So.
Well, look out! If it all comes together next week, look out next week Tuesday night, because you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Oh, I can't wait! I'm tuned in. I can't wait.
All right, well, you enjoy the rest of your night. See.
Hey, shout out to the historian too. Can't wait to see you next week.
All right.